This is a response to Eye2EyeIIIV's Why Believe in a Young Earth. His video, spanning 17 points, is chock full of misrepresentations, misconstruences, and complete fabrications of science. You can check references by clicking or cut-pasting them from the description. Starting with point 1.
1. The spin of the Earth. Earth's rotation is slowing at the rate of 1,000th of a second per day. At this rate a billion years ago, it would have been spinning so fast that centrifugal force would have caused it to flatten like a pancake. The spin of the Earth is gradually slowing down, and shows that the Earth cannot be more than a few thousand years old.
To begin with, his figure on the rate of Earth slowing is wrong. In 1820, a day lasted 86,400 seconds. Today, it lasts 86,400.002 seconds. The length of the day has only changed by 0.0014 seconds per century. If you multiply that by 4.5 billion years, that gives us a 6.5 hour day, being 23,400 seconds long. That is nowhere near the velocity needed to flatten the Earth out like a pancake.
2. Civilizations and writing. How can it be that, if men stopped evolving 100,000 years ago?
Whoa, easy there, Cha-Cha. Whoever said humanity ever stopped evolving? We're still evolving, even today.
He only learned how to form civilizations and write within the last 5 to 10,000 years. Also, the oldest civilizations appear around the world about the same time, and all were already very advanced, building marvelous structures, like the pyramids of the Incan, Aztec, and Mayan empires. There is no indication of a general evolution of civilization.
Actually, there are several not so advanced pre-civilizations. The Mesopotamian civilization began around 4000 BC, but before that, in the same general area, was the less advanced Natufian culture, which started around 12,000 BC. The Chinese culture began around 3500 BC. They were preceded by the less advanced Pengtushan, Yahoo, and Peligang culture, all starting at around 9000 BC. The Indus Valley civilization, which began around 3000 BC, was preceded by the less advanced Vedic cultures who date back to 6000 BC. The South American civilizations, like the Aztecs, were preceded by several civilizations going back to 2000 BC, and also were in turn preceded by the less advanced Clovis culture around 11,500 BC. Their descendants began cultivating maize around 10,000 BC. Before all of that, there are the remains of villages all over the world which date back to as far as 20,000 BC, like the Ohalo village, which is on the southeastern shore of the Dead Sea. Even before that, we find cave paintings going back over 30,000 years. There was nothing sudden about the appearance of civilization. It had many precursors.
And cave paintings have always shown people standing upright.
Cave paintings always show people standing upright because you pretty much have to be able to stand upright to hold a brush or a tool for any extended amount of time to be able to actually make a cave painting. Humanity's ancestors had already been walking upright for millions of years before they were even human, and by extension, before the advent of intelligence or art.
3. Population growth. Realistic population growth formulas, accounting for wars, etc., give several thousand years as needed to produce the current world population, not millions of years. The rate of population growth has been steady for the time that we have records. The present 7 billion is the right number of people to have multiplied from the 8 survivors of the worldwide flood about 4,400 years ago.
Actually, the rate of population growth has never been steady throughout recorded history. In recent years, in fact, it has increased exponentially. Now, if the population were to regularly double from 8 people in 2350 BC to the 7 billion people we have today, creationist Henry Morris proposes that the population would have to double at a rate of 5% every century. That means that 100 years later, we would have less than 20 people around to build all of the pyramids. There would also be less than 800 people when Moses supposedly led 600,000 men in 1446 BC. There would also be less than 100,000 people in 481 BC when Xerxes was leading over 2.5 million.
If man had been around for millions of years, the same growth rate would have produced 150,000 people per square inch of land surface.
Humans haven't been around for millions of years, and no credible scientist says they have.
4. The moon moving away from Earth. The rate at which the moon is moving away from the Earth, due to tidal friction, places a limit on the age of the moon of a few thousand years. If it were millions of years old, it would have had to start very close to the Earth, causing ocean tides so severe, it would have drowned everything on land twice a day.
This one is basic math. The moon's current distance is 360,000 kilometers away. It moves away from the Earth at a rate of 3 centimeters per year. You go back 4.5 billion years, the moon would only be 135,000 kilometers closer, which means the moon would still be more than half its current distance away.
5. Space dust on the moon. Space dust accumulates on the surface of the moon at the rate of about 1 inch for every 10,000 years. Astronauts found an average of 1/2 inch, just about what you would expect in 6,000 years.
Estimates from satellite-borne detectors and from deep-sea sediments conclusively show that the amount of dust impacting the moon to be roughly 2.3 tons per day, which may seem like a lot, but after 4.5 billion years it only yields a layer of dust about 1.5 inches.
6. Helium in atmosphere. Accumulation of helium in the atmosphere implies a maximum age of no more than 10,000 years.
This bit is suspicious because there's no increase in the amount of helium in the atmosphere at all. It's relatively constant. The reason for this is that the solar wind is actually responsible for the escape of helium at almost the exact rate in which it is produced. The escape of helium is also regulated by the regular reversal of the poles.
Buildup of radiocarbon in the atmosphere would produce all of the world's radiocarbon in only several thousand years.
Using measurements of lake sediments containing organic compounds, we can safely determine that the concentration of C14 in the atmosphere has not varied more than 10% in the last 22,000 years. Now, comparing it to tree rings, even if trees did happen to produce a second ring every year, which they don't, but if they did, by calibrating them with carbon dates and lake sediments, we still have an Earth that is twice as old as creationists claim it is.
7. Mutations. Calculations based on the gradually increasing negative effect of mutation on living organisms indicate that life forms cannot be more than several thousand years old and still be as free from defects as they are today.
Calculations? What calculations? This is fuzzy math based on a completely unscientific assumption. Many mutations do occur at a steady rate, but the vast majority of them do not cause any defects at all. They're mostly neutral. The ones that are harmful tend to be removed by that easily observed mechanism of natural selection. Beneficial mutations tend to be preserved by the exact same process.
8. Earth's magnetic field. Earth's magnetic field is getting weaker. At the rate of deterioration, no such field would exist if the Earth were as old as evolutionists believe.
Earth's magnetic field fluctuates. It has a fairly regular cycle of even fluctuating so far as to reverse itself. We know this from fossilized coral that demonstrates quite clearly that the geomagnetic field has reversed itself at least 20 times over the past 3.5 million years, which, as addressed in number 6, allows for even more removal of helium from the atmosphere.
9. Radiopolonium halos. Dr. Robert Gentry makes amazing discovery. Polonium halos, ring patterns formed by radioactive decay found in granite, the thick bedrock underlying all continents, shows that the granite came into existence in solid form in less than 3 minutes. What is interesting about this is that the isotope polonium-218 has a half-life of 3 minutes. So if you find a radio halo of polonium-218 within any sample of granite, that granite had to form within less than 21 minutes. The isotope polonium-214 has a half-life of 164 microseconds. This means that the granites absolutely had to form in less than 0.001148 of 1 second. It also means that in order for the granites, the basement or foundation rocks of the planet Earth, to have formed in less than 1 second, that the entire Earth had to come into existence in less than 1 second.
Dr. Gentry has yet to demonstrate that his halos are even produced by radioactive decay, let alone that they are from polonium decay, but let's go ahead and give his idea a shot here. Both polonium-218 and 214 are in the decay chain of uranium-238, which has a half-life of 4.5 billion years. If the halos were really polonium halos, they could easily have been created by the decay of uranium-238, literally seconds before Gentry discovered them.
As soon it was discovered that Gentry's scientific research was proving evolution theory wrong, he was fired, even though he had an excellent degree and PhD in astrophysics.
In 1969, Oak Ridge National Laboratory invited Gentry to use their facilities in hopes of discovering super-heavy elements. They never fired him. He was only a guest. However, at the time, he did testify in the case of McLean versus the Arkansas Board of Education on behalf of the creationists, and he lost, so he obviously wasn't disproving anything about evolution.
10. Planets are losing heat. The planets are losing heat. If they had been formed millions of years ago, they would have no internal heat left given the present rate of heat loss.
Jupiter's temperature is dropping by a whopping 1/1,000,000th of a Kelvin per year. The temperature of Saturn, however, is increasing due to seasonal changes.
If the hot cup of coffee were left standing for 400 years, it would have no internal heat left.
A hot cup of coffee fails as an analogy for the planets, as a hot cup of coffee does not have radioactivity driving its heat.
11. Saturn is losing its rings. The planet Saturn is losing its rings. They are slowly moving away. If the planet were millions of years old, the material in the rings would have dissipated long ago.
What do Saturn's rings have to do with the age of Saturn, let alone the age of Earth? In fact, Saturn's rings are less than 100 million years old. They're most likely remnants of a moon or moons which fell below the Roche limit and were ripped apart by tidal forces.
12. Comets. As comets travel through space, they continually shed some of their material. Any comet more than 10,000 years old would have long since disintegrated into nothing.
Comets are a very small percentage of objects found in the Kuiper belt, the scattered disk, and the Oort cloud. Creationists like to say there's no evidence for these, but many objects in the area where all three are proposed to be have been well documented.
13. Petroleum and oil. They're under tremendous pressure in the ground. The rocks that contain it are porous. If the oil had been there for millions of years, the pressure would have dissipated long ago. Studies show that any pressure built should be dissipated, bled off into surrounding rocks, within a few thousand years. The excessive pressures found in oil beds therefore refute the notion that their age is millions of years old. This gives evidence for the youthful age, less than 10,000 years, of the rock formations in the entrapped oil.
Every geological map I have ever seen shows oil is present beneath impermeable rocks. If the rocks couldn't handle the pressure, the oil wouldn't be there in the first place. Not to mention that oil itself migrates from one place to another, so even if the field is young, the oil is still ancient.
14. Oldest living plants. The oldest living plants, the bristlecone pine tree and the coral reefs, only go back about 4,500 years. It's even been revealed that trees can produce more than one ring a year. If Earth had existed for millions of years, why aren't there older plants still alive?
The oldest recorded tree is a 10,000-year-old spruce in the Dalarna province of Sweden. By the way, coral is an animal, not a plant. Meanwhile, October 8, 2000, Russell Vreeland discovered a species called Bacillus permians in ancient salt crystals, which turned out to be 250 million years old. After soaking them in a nutrient-rich broth, they were revived and even began multiplying vigorously. So for a very short period of time, the oldest living thing on Earth was 250 million years old. And by the way, the reason trees from millions of years ago aren't alive today is the same reason why people from 1,000 years ago aren't alive today either. they died.
15. Ocean salt. The salinity of the oceans would have been much greater. But they're only 3.8% salt now. The present rate of increase points back to a beginning about 6,000 years ago.
This would be a compelling argument if there actually was a present rate of decrease, but there isn't. Why? Because there are over 20 mechanisms which deplete ocean salt at about the same rate as it feeds in.
16. Stalactites and caves. Evolutionists point to stalactites and caves as proof of an old Earth, but there are stalactites in the basement of the Lincoln Memorial several feet long that have grown in less than 100 years.
Stalactites and caves are composed of calcium carbonate, which is not water soluble. They are formed by carbonic acid seeping through the earth and dripping from the cave ceiling. Stalactites in the Lincoln Memorial are composed of gypsum or concrete, which are both quite water soluble. The stalactites in caves and the stalactites in the Lincoln Memorial were formed by two completely different chemical reactions.
And 17. Carbon dating. C14 dating actually proves a young Earth. Carbon dating is directly proportional to the magnetic field. Because as the magnetic field declines, more radiation gets in, and that's what forms carbon-14. It is quite possible from studied science that the magnetic field of the Earth started to slightly decline after Adam sinned. Then there were a lot of reversals done at the time of Noah's flood. Then before and during the time of Jesus, there were several fluctuations. And now since then, there has been steady continuous decay to the magnetic field till now.
Pole reversals? The fact that you even acknowledge that poles reverse refutes your argument about the strength of the Earth's magnetic field. However, I'd love to know what evidence you have for the many reversals you claim to have occurred in the last 6,000 years, since the last one we know of occurred 780,000 years ago.
An alternative interpretation of the C14 data is that the Earth experienced a global flood catastrophe which laid down most of the rock strata and fossils.
Your view of C14 may be alternative, but it doesn't apply to the age of strata at all, which isn't even gauged by C14. C14 is only used to date organic finds up to 50,000 years old. Now, looking at the strata itself, however, destroys your interpretation completely. This chart represents each of the layers found in North Dakota down to about 15,000 feet. The layers in yellow are composed of shale, which is only formed in shallow water. The pink band is composed of fossilized coral reefs. The light blue layers are composed of anhydrate, which requires the process of evaporation for it to form. Now, that's not possible if it's underwater or covered by other layers. The red bands are formed by caliche, which forms only under dry conditions, as does gypsum. The green bands only formed under dry conditions. A worldwide flood cannot explain intermittent, alternating strata composed of materials only formed under dry or evaporative conditions. There are other details I could point out, but geology is not my strongest subject. Eye2EyeIIIV, your arguments are not even new. They are long refuted by repeatable science that has been published for decades. All you have to do is read it.